He stood in line, he had shopping bags with him, and it was those very shopping bags by his feet that witnesses remembered. Hi, welcome to another episode of Criminal Patrol. Well, this is a crime that's hard to forget. I also think that out of respect for the victims, we can't forget about crimes like this. From time to time, as a warning, we also need to remind people about them. That's the case with Kasia, a girl who was only 9 years old. The death of a child always stirs up strong emotions. I remember what happened, and you probably remember too, after the murder of Christina from Morawini. The case we also talked about, a 10-year-old girl who was murdered. It's similar in this story. All of this happened in Bajina, a town in Silesia. Bajina isn't a place that's completely unknown. It's about 70 kilometers from Opol, but a lot happens there. Well, I'm not even mentioning, for those interested in history, the Battle of Bajina, but there are also championships like soccer tournaments, painting workshops, and night tournaments. Well, a lot happens there, so I think that when you're there, you'll also remember what happened in Bitsina almost 28 years ago. And for many years, well, in some way it made people think about this tragedy. They thought about it, they said they still remembered it. In fact, that's still the case to this day.
We welcome our new supporters Jace2041, Jace2041 Kulik and Gregory Sobczak. Greetings to our regular patrons who support us at the highest levels. Mona Monika, Anna Maria KRK, Kinga Struska, Wira, Dorota Kowalówka, Dawid Grobecki and Bartosz Zięciak. Thank you for your support. It helps us make new videos. To support us, click the link in the video description.
Kasia was only 9 years old. She was dearly loved by her parents. Well, of course she was, because she was an only child. Kasia's parents had been trying to have her for many years. For many years it didn't work out, so when she was born, they were very happy. And she was also a calm, well-behaved child. She did well in school. Well, for them, of course, she was the apple of their eye. It seemed like it was just an ordinary day on October 3rd, 1996. Kasia, as usual, was getting ready for school that day. The usual morning bustle, breakfast, packing up. At 7:40 she left for school. It was an ordinary, normal day, but when she didn't come back, her mother started to worry. But she remembered that Kasia's father was supposed to visit his sister in the hospital that day. So she thought that probably what happened was that he went to pick Kasia up from school. He picked her up and together they went to visit Kasia's aunt in the hospital. But Kasia's father comes home around 4 p.m. and says that his daughter wasn't with him, and that's when it hits her. They fell into a huge panic because they didn't know what was happening with their daughter. They started looking for her, calling everywhere, but it was all in vain. Kasia was simply nowhere to be found. The parents, of course, mobilized everyone they could. Well, it's also a small town, so this kind of information spreads everywhere very quickly. Neighbors, friends, and family are mobilizing. Firefighters and scouts show up. Well, everyone starts searching. No one even considers that someone could have hurt Kasia. Well, they considered that maybe it was some kind of unfortunate accident. So first of all, they went along the route she usually took. They checked the ditches, some manholes, abandoned buildings, houses, and properties. But they didn't find any trace. Of course, the parents also started going to the neighbors, asking questions. The closest neighbor to Kasia's parents was Krzysztof. Krzysztof is a 32-year-old man who lives literally across the street, right opposite. They didn't have any special contact with him. Of course they did, because he was the closest neighbor. Well, but Krzysztof used to drink. Basically, he was a drunk, you could say, an alcoholic. On top of that, he did all kinds of strange jobs. Among other things, he helped with burials, with people's funerals. But in the sense that he simply prepared the deceased person for burial, meaning he dressed them, washed them, did some makeup, and combed their hair. Well, that's rather a macabre job. So Kasia's parents went to Krzysztof's place across the street. He opened the door. He said Kasia wasn't there, that he hadn't seen her. They even went inside. Well, but he hadn't paid for electricity for a long time, so his power was cut off. On top of that, he was also living alone because, well, his father passed away. He lived alone in that apartment and drank. Well, there was a slight smell, so to speak, that lingered in the apartment. So they went in, checked, but then left. Katarzyna's parents were actually a bit grateful to Krzysztof for that, because after his father's death, he offered to swap apartments with them. He moved into their apartment. They got a bigger one thanks to that, so they were grateful to him for agreeing to such an exchange. Well, the search is ongoing. The search is practically on a large scale, on a citywide scale, because, well, everyone is getting involved in looking for Kasia, but without any results. They haven't managed to find any trace of her or any specific place where she might have last been. Well, as often happens in these kinds of stories, the family is literally grasping at anything. They also went to a clairvoyant. The clairvoyant said that Kasia is alive, but she's in such a dangerous situation that she was actually attacked, knocked out, and is being held captive. At this moment, she's behind some cardboard boxes in a house made of red bricks. Well, when people looked, there were houses made of red bricks on Duga Street in that town, in Bycina. And indeed, Kasia could have walked past those houses. Everyone was mobilized, the police, those houses were searched, but without any result. No concrete trace was found either. They searched in clay pits. And in places like this, in such groves, everywhere Kasia could have passed. But after some time, already on the second day, the search was expanded further, assuming that either she went somewhere or someone simply abducted her. Two days later, that was already October 5th, as I told you, the scouts also joined the search operation. They were also searching in some nearby places. There was also a landfill in the area. They reached the landfill around 11 o'clock and saw that there were some plastic bags by the landfill. There were 2 plastic bags, and it was immediately clear that there was blood on those bags. Well, the scouts looked inside, and today they're probably adults already, but what they saw back then will surely haunt their dreams, or has been haunting them ever since. Because in one of the bags there was a human head, and in the other human limbs, arms and legs. Gruesome things. Well, it looked like the killer cut off the head, cut off the arms and legs, packed them into those 2 plastic bags and left them at the dump. The investigative team showed up, the prosecutor. The remains were taken to the forensic medicine facility. Well, it was Kasia's body. Not the whole body, because the torso was missing, but that's how Kasia died, in such a gruesome way. It's a small town, so news spreads instantly. Besides, there were people there, they started talking to each other, they started talking about it, and for people it was a real shock, because things like this happen somewhere else in the world. Maybe you see it on TV, but not in their small town. There was real panic. People were afraid to even leave their homes, to send their children to school. The city practically stopped functioning normally, because from a psychological point of view, they were all aware that if someone killed Kasia, a defenseless child, it was done by someone who lived among them. That they might meet this person, maybe even say good morning to him, that such a beast is simply among them. Of course, it's hard to deal with this kind of traumatic situation, but that's just how it had to be. Pitch. Of course, the police did what they could, and the provincial police headquarters in Opole was also notified. Opole sent their best specialists, and the search began. The police officers also realized that there had to be some information somewhere, because in such a small town, that information must have been noticed and passed around, that people must have seen something. They decided to describe in detail everything they knew, including showing the plastic bags in which the body was found. And indeed it was useful. People started to remember. They began to connect the facts. They also started talking about how a few days earlier they had seen someone who had such a plastic bag. They also remembered who it was. And actually, even back then, they started using that name. They started calling the man who committed the murder the Vampire of Bizina. And people remembered. A few days earlier, Christoph was walking with a plastic bag like that. Christoph is the family's neighbor. The one living across the street, the one who opened the door and said he didn't know what happened to Kasia. It seemed that he really had nothing to do with this case. When people started to remember, they recalled that on that day he was standing in front of a store drinking beer. And he leaned that plastic bag against his leg. People were convinced that it was him. Before the police arrived, basically a group of people was already in front of that house. How would it have ended? Well, it's not out of the question that it could have ended in some kind of lynching. But the police officers went inside and detained Christoph. Christoph confessed to everything almost immediately. He admitted that he killed Kasia. He later, but even then he didn't say everything. He probably wasn't completely honest. We can assume that it looked like this. Kasia was coming back from school. He was either somewhere in the stairwell or he was lying on it. It's not out of the question that she helped him get up and brought him to the apartment door. When he opened the door, he suddenly pulled her into the apartment. He started strangling her with a belt. And after he strangled her, he raped her too. Well, after all that, he somehow pulled himself together. He realized he had to do something with the body. First he moved Kasia's body to the bathroom, to the bathtub. He put her in the bathtub. Then he took a saw, a knife. He started cutting the body. He put it into 3 plastic bags. First he took out one bag. He took out the one with the torso, and he buried it near the SKR. And he took out the other 2. Later, when he was walking with them, he felt weak. That's when he also went to the store to get some alcohol, just to fortify himself. So he stood in line, he had the shopping bags with him, and those very shopping bags standing by his feet. They remembered that, the witnesses. That's more or less how it must have looked, even at the moment when he was about to leave the apartment with the shopping bags. Someone knocked on the door. It was Kasia's parents. They asked him if he had seen her. He told them that he had seen Kasia, but in the morning, when she was going to school, she even said good morning to him. But he didn't see her again, and he doesn't know what happened to her. The parents didn't press him anyway. They accepted what he said. They even came into the apartment for a moment. But like I told you, he didn't pay. He didn't pay for the electricity. So they couldn't see much. While Kasia's parents were there at that time, in that apartment at his place, he just put those shopping bags behind the wardrobe. Kasia's funeral was, of course, a public outpouring. A lot of people came. Around 3,000. The coffin was carried by scouts. She was also buried in that white dress, the one she wore for her first communion just a year earlier. And Mom also said. Later she told Kasia about it, that there was a cake at the first communion, and a piece of that cake, she brought it over to Krzysiek, the neighbor. During the trial, well, Krzysztof himself, the murderer, the vampire of Bydzina, because that's what he became. He kept his hands. He was holding a photo of Kasia in his hand. He was staring at it. He said himself that he would like to have a death sentence. But he already knew back then that the death sentence had been suspended from a historical point of view. That's also important, because for the first time, after the change in regulations, for a murder of this kind, the death penalty was not imposed, but a life sentence was given. So this trial also went down in the history of Polish criminology. A shocking case. A case that, well, it's just hard to forget. Kasia's mom said during the trial that she had only one flower in her life, that flower. He couldn't defend himself. He was scattered across the fields. She also demanded the death penalty for Krzysztof. Well, we can imagine the tragedy. A mother who waited many years for this, just to have him at all. A child? Well, it was a shocking story. And always, we ask ourselves a question. Why did this happen? Why did the neighbor, who knew Kasia after all, with whom the family had actually pretty good relations, do this? He himself. I watched his conversation with Edward Miszczak. I saw the way he told it, the way he spoke. He seemed to me in all of this very cynical, even at some point. At one point the word trash was used. He said that he used that word, just in general. He didn't take it personally. In fact, I would say that he was trying to explain, he talked about it, that he killed because of that on that day he was in a bad mental state, that he felt bad. Actually, it was the day when he was supposed to report to jail because he had a sentence to serve. 8 months of imprisonment. So he was in a depressive state. He killed. Because it could have been anyone, in my opinion. He has no self-reflection. He has no compassion. The fact that he demanded the death penalty, it was purely calculated because he knew that the death penalty simply doesn't exist anymore. The verdict was passed on August 28, 1997. Krzysztof Pańków. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. As far as I know, he is still serving that sentence. All in all, today he is, so to speak, only 61 years old. He is definitely a man who should never be released from prison. That's it. It's a very gruesome story, but also I talk about this quite often, that we shouldn't forget about these kinds of crimes, even if only in some way by remembering the victims and this tragedy sometimes as a warning. And that's it for today's episode. Of course, subscribe to our channel, and as always, take care.
We welcome our new supporters, Jacek 2000, Jace 2041, Kulik and Gregor Sobczak. We send our regards to our regular patrons, supporting us at the highest levels. Mona Monika, Anna Maria KRK, Kinga Struska, Wira Dorota Kowalówka, Dawid Grobecki, and Bartosz Zięciak. Thank you for your support. We create new videos thanks to your support. To help us, click the link in the video description.